Arizona Territory, 1882. The sun was dead and gone, the sky black as a burnt wick, when Zadie Forrester ran for her life with blood on her dress and a badge behind her. Her boots scraped the dry gravel as she cut through the brush behind the jailhouse, the scent of creosote and sweat thick in her nose. Sheriff Crowley was not far behind, and he was not the kind of man who let go easy. He had locked her up not for a crime, but for what she knew about the land he stole, the Apache children he sold, and the bodies buried where no one dared look. She had seen too much. And now she was his secret to bury. Her lungs burned as she reached the horse she'd stashed earlier, a wiry bay mare tethered behind the livery. She hoisted herself up, heart hammering, and kicked off just as the sheriff's voice rang out behind her. "Zadie," he shouted. "You won't make it far." She did not answer, could not. All she could do was ride. The desert swallowed her whole. Darkness stretched wide. The moon was a thin sliver, barely enough light to see the trail, but she knew where she was headed: south, to the border where the sheriff's badge held no power. She rode through the night, her thoughts a blur of heat and fear. Her wrists were raw from the irons she had pried off. Her lips split from where Crowley had hit her when she tried to speak the truth. But she was free now. For the moment, by dawn, the horse limped beneath her, worn out and thirsty. Zadie slid off, stumbling toward a flat stretch of scrubland, unsure how far she had come. Her knees hit the sand. That was when she saw him. A man stepped out from behind a low ridge, tall and quiet, his rifle slung across his back and a wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over sharp eyes. He looked like he belonged to the land: dust on his coat, dark hair curling at his neck, and a stillness about him like he had seen too much and said too little. He looked at her but did not speak. Zadie's voice came out hoarse. "I need help." He looked down at her hands, the scabbed wrists. Then at her face, where the bruise had already bloomed purple. "You running from someone?" he asked, voice low. Even she nodded. "The sheriff." Her jaw clenched. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to. He locked me up. I barely made it out." The man did not ask more, did not need to. He stepped forward and held out a canteen. She drank, slow and shaking. "I am trying to get to Mexico," she said. "Please, I do not have anything to trade, but if you help me, I am not looking for trade," he said. "I am heading south myself." She blinked at him. He tipped his hat back and nodded. "Name's Zethan Vale. You can ride with me." Zadie stared at him, unsure what to make of a man like that. He had nothing in his eyes, no pity, no hunger, just quiet steadiness. And after all she had been through, that steadiness felt like something she could hold on to. They rode double on his horse, a strong gray gelding that moved smooth through the dawn. Zadie leaned against Zethan's back, her cheek brushing the worn fabric of his coat. She did not speak again for a long while, neither did he. By midday they made camp under a rock ledge. Zethan built a fire, kept it low. He handed her jerky and a strip of dried apple. "You always help strangers?" she asked, her voice softer now. "No," he said. She looked at him, waiting. He met her gaze. "But you do not look like someone who has time to wait for someone better." Zadie laughed, a startled sound. She had not laughed in days. Zethan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. She watched him as he moved, the way he checked the edge of the fire, the way his eyes scanned the horizon even when he seemed relaxed. She did not know what kind of man he was, but she knew he was not like Crowley. He had no lies on his face. That night, she woke to the sound of hoofbeats. Zethan was already crouched, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the dark. He motioned for her to stay low. A single rider passed by, slow and scanning the ground. She recognized the coat, one of Crowley's deputies. Her breath caught, but the rider kept going. Zadie's hands shook. Zethan came back to her, quiet as the wind. He knelt beside her. "You are not safe yet," he said, "but we will keep moving. We will get you across." She nodded, eyes wide in the moonlight. "Thank you," she whispered. He studied her, something unreadable in his gaze. Then he said, "You do not owe me for doing what is right." They rode at dawn again, cutting across dry riverbeds and thorny flats. Zadie started to talk, piece by piece, about the old mission school where she had once taught Apache children, about how Crowley had sold land meant for the tribe, how she had found out by accident. Zethan listened. Said little. One night, 3 days from the border, they made camp in a narrow canyon. Zadie sat beside the fire, her knees tucked to her chest. Zethan handed her his coat. Desert gets cold at night. She took it. You were a soldier, were you not? He hesitated. Yes. Which side? He sighed. Union. Cavalry? She nodded slowly. My brother fought for the Union, died in Tennessee. I am sorry. She looked at him, really looked. You have that look, like someone who has carried too much. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, so do you. It was not flirtation, not comfort. Just truth, spoken plain. That night, she lay wrapped in his coat, staring at the stars. She felt safer than she had in months, and when she closed her eyes, she did not dream of the jail cell. She dreamed of a gray horse beneath her and a quiet man beside her, leading her toward something like freedom. The sun climbed slow, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. Zethan stirred the ashes of last night's fire with a stick, coaxing the last warmth from it before they set out again. Zadie sat nearby, pulling her damp stockings from a low-hanging mesquite branch where she'd washed them the night before. Her hair hung loose, brushed back with her fingers, still tangled from sleep. You ever been across before? She asked, not looking up. Zethan tied his bedroll with practiced hands. Twice. First time I was following a man who stole army rifles. Second time I wasn't chasing anyone, just needed to be somewhere else. She nodded, threading her needle through the worn collar of her blouse. And now I'm helping you get where you need to go. He looked over at her. That's still south, her hands stilled. I'll keep going until he can't touch me, and if that means south, then yes. He studied her for a long moment before tightening the saddle's cinch. We ought to cut west a bit today. There's a water spring tucked in a bluff north of Nogales. Not many know it. That your horse's idea or yours? He gave a dry grunt. His memory's better than mine most days. They rode without hurry, the land growing rockier and harsher. Zadie leaned forward, resting her palms lightly on Zethan's hips to steady herself as the gelding picked its way up an incline. The wind carried dust and the scent of mesquite pods. A hawk circled far overhead. By late morning, they reached the spring. It trickled through a narrow split in the rock, shallow but clear. Zadie crouched to fill the canteens while Zethan rubbed down the horse. She glanced up. You always travel alone. I've ridden with others. Doesn't always end well. She waited, but he didn't offer more. I used to think I'd marry a quiet man, she said, rinsing her hands. But I never imagined how hard it'd be to hold a conversation with one. He removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair, and sat beside her. Thinking about marriage already, she laughed under her breath, not unkindly. I'm thinking about what I used to expect from life, before all this. What you expect? I thought I'd teach a few years, settle down somewhere with a patch of ground and a man who didn't raise his voice unless there was a fire. Zethan didn't answer right away. Then, that sounds like something worth wanting. She turned her face toward the sun, eyes half closed. You want anything like that? He leaned his back against the rock. I did once, before the war, before I saw what it made of men. She didn't press. Instead, she handed him the filled canteen and stood, brushing dust from her skirt. We should keep moving. They rode until the light began to turn gold, the horizon rippling with heat. Zethan guided them toward a low ridge where ocotillo grew in sparse lines. They dismounted, and he scouted the slope on foot before motioning for her to follow. Trail ends beyond that draw, he said. From there, it's half a day's ride to the edge. Zadie adjusted the shawl around her shoulders. Then we're close. He nodded once. They'll patrol heavier near the border. We need to cross where the river bends west, shallow there and the brush gives cover. She looked out across the dry land. You're not obligated to go past the river, I know. Then why are you still with me? Zethan rested a hand on the saddle horn. Because you didn't ask for help, but you needed it, and because I don't leave things unfinished. Zadie stepped closer. And when I cross, what then? His mouth tightened, but not with anger. Then I'll have to decide if I'm ready to stop running too. Her breath caught, a strange little ache forming in her chest. That night, the stars came out sharp and cold. They didn't speak much as they ate, the fire low and steady between them. Zadie sewed a small tear in her hem by firelight, fingers nimble. Zethan carved a strip of wood to pass the time, his knife glinting under the moon. When she finished, she looked over at him. If I asked you to come with me past the river, would you? He didn't look up. I don't make promises I can't keep. I'm not asking for a promise. He set the knife down. Then yes, I think I would. Zadie didn't smile, but her eyes softened in a way he hadn't seen before. She reached across the space between them, placed her hand on the back of his. Zethan didn't pull away. Tomorrow they would ride to the river. But tonight they sat close, not needing words, the firelight flickering between them and something unspoken settling into place, quiet, steady, and real. By first light, the wind had shifted, carrying the scent of mesquite smoke from somewhere east. Zethan stood at the edge of the ridge, eyes narrowed against the horizon. Below, the land sloped toward the Rio Grande, a winding thread in the distance, glinting silver beneath the rising sun. Zadie rolled up the bedroll without a word, her hands sure. She didn't ask if he smelled it too. She could see it in the way his shoulders held still, as if listening to something only he could hear. They broke camp quickly. The trail narrowed as they dropped into a shallow arroyo, the horse picking its way through gravel and bent willow. The hush between them wasn't heavy. It had the shape of something waiting. At a bend in the wash, Zethan slowed the gelding and looked back. "You see that ridge to the right?" he asked. She followed his gaze. "The one with the dead tree at the top. There's a man up there. Rifle barrel just caught the sun." Zadie's mouth went dry. Crowley's men, could be, or someone else looking to make trouble. "Either way, we don't go that way." They turned west, following a cattle path that dipped low through thornbrush and faded out beneath a stand of cottonwoods. The river was closer now. She could hear it soft and steady like breath in the dark. The gelding snorted suddenly, ears flicking. Zethan stepped down, rifle in hand. Something's wrong with the trail ahead. Zadie stayed mounted, scanning the brush. "You think they're waiting?" He crouched, fingers brushing the dirt. "Too many tracks, wagon ruts, fresh, boots too, no livestock." He looked up. This wasn't a crossing. It was a search. Her pulse thudded in her throat. "They're trying to cut us off." He led them away from the path, guiding the horse through a dry gully choked with brittle reeds. They walked for miles, the sun climbing overhead, until the land flattened and the river spread before them, wide, shallow, and quiet. Zadie stepped into the water first, boots sinking into the muck. The current was slow, tugging at her hem. She didn't look back until she reached the far bank. Zethan joined her, water running dark off his coat. He studied the opposite shore, then turned toward the scrubland ahead. "From here, it's a few hours to Nogales," he said. "There's a man I know there. He owes me." She wrung out her sleeves. "What kind of man?" "Trader, keeps to himself. He can get you papers, a place to be if you want it." "And you?" she asked. He didn't answer. They walked until the river was only a ribbon behind them. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the chaparral. Zadie's legs ached, her skirts stiff with salt and mud. Still, she kept pace. When they stopped to rest beneath a mesquite, she turned to him. "You haven't told me why you were heading south." He ran a hand along his jaw. "Because the north held too many graves." She waited. "I buried my brother near Fort Garland," he said finally. "He didn't die in battle. He died after. Couldn't live with what he saw." Zadie sat beside him, her knees pulled close. "You think it would have been different if he'd never gone?" "I think the world would have found a way to break him either way." She watched the last light bleed from the sky. "You ever think about stopping?" "Staying in one place. I did once. Got close to buying land near Santa Fe. Then the man who sold it turned out to be lying about the deed. Sheriff backed him, took everything." She didn't speak for a while. Then, softly, "The law doesn't mean much out here, does it?" "No," he said. "But a man still has to decide who he is without it." Zadie touched her sleeve where the fabric had frayed. "I've been running so long I don't know what I'd do if I stopped." "You'd find out," he said. She turned to him, the shadows deepening between them. "Would you stay?" "If I did," he met her gaze, steady as ever. "If you asked me, I am." Zethan didn't need to say anything. He reached for her hand, rough palm closing around hers, and the quiet between them shifted into something certain. They stood together, the land wide and open before them. Behind them, the river kept flowing, carrying all the past away with it. Ahead, there was the promise of a border town, a place to begin again, and enough time to learn what it meant to build something together, not out of escape, but choice. They walked on, side by side, neither leading nor following. Just walking forward. The town sat low in the dust, its buildings sun-faded and square-shouldered, strung out along a single crooked street. Nogales didn't announce itself. It simply rose from the desert, like it had always been there, weathered, wary, and waiting. Zethan reined the gelding toward the edge of the settlement, guiding them behind a half-fallen adobe wall where they could watch without being seen. Zadie stood beside him, the edge of her shawl pulled tight against her collarbone. Wind tugged at the hem of her skirt, and her eyes flicked from the saloon doors to the stable yard, then to the low building with a rusted tin roof at the far end of the street. "You trust this man?" she asked. "I trust his fear of debt," Zethan said. "He owes me more than coin." She looked at him, studying his face like she was measuring the shape of his reply. "What did you do for him?" kept his son from swinging. "Boy was 16, shot a man in a card house north of Tucson. Didn't know how to lie clean yet." Zethan adjusted the rifle strap on his shoulder. "I found the witness who'd seen the other fellow pull first, made sure he testified." Zadie didn't speak. She stepped out from behind the wall and started toward the town. "Then let's collect on what you're owed." They passed a mule cart loaded with sacks of flour, its driver asleep under his hat. A woman swept dust from her porch, pausing only to glance at them with tired eyes before returning to her work. Above the saloon, a cracked sign swayed in the breeze, its lettering barely visible. Zethan led her to the rusted roof building. It had no name, just a weathered plank nailed across the door. He knocked once, wait long enough to test patience, then knocked again. A man opened the door, small and fox-thin, with ink-stained fingers and a tobacco-streaked beard. "I was told you left Arizona," he said, his voice sharp with suspicion. Zethan didn't flinch. "I came back for something better." The man's eyes flicked to Zadie. "She trouble. She's the reason I'm here." Inside, the air smelled of old paper and lamp oil. A brass lantern swung from a low beam and boxes of ledgers lined the walls. The man walked to a desk cluttered with half-filled forms and bottles of ink. "I suppose I can write up something convincing," he said, reaching for his pen. "But it'll cost." Zethan stepped forward. "Then I'll remind you what the gallows cost." The man's shoulders stiffened. He opened a drawer, pulled out a folded piece of parchment, and began to write. The scratch of the pen was loud in the stillness. Zadie stood near the window, watching a stray dog limp across the street. "What will it say? That your name is Alina Duarte, that you've got family in Sonora, that you're returning home after tending your sick aunt in Prescott." She nodded once. "That'll do." The document was ready by dusk. Zethan paid in coin more than it was worth, but the man said nothing, only folded the paper and handed it to Zadie. She slipped it into the lining of her skirt. Outside, the wind had calmed. Smoke from a cookfire drifted in slow spirals above the rooftops. They walked to the far edge of town, where the land opened up again into wide, red plain. There was a small house there, built from stone and timber, half covered in creeping vines. A woman in a dark skirt stood on the porch, arms dusted with flour, her cheeks streaked with heat. She squinted at Zethan. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "I need a place to stay a few nights," he said. "Somewhere quiet." "You still rent out the back room?" The woman looked at Zadie, then back at him. $1 a night, but only if you split the chores." Zadie stepped forward. "I can cook, so too." The woman gave a brief nod. "Then you're welcome." The room was small but clean. A single bed, a washbasin, a narrow window that looked out on the mesquite grove beyond the house. Zadie placed her bundle on the floor and sat carefully on the edge of the bed. Zethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You all right?" She looked up at him, the tired in her eyes softened now, not afraid, just worn. "I'm not used to doors that lock from the inside," she said. He pushed the door all the way open and stepped in. "Then lock it, and rest. We'll talk tomorrow." She stood then, walked to him, and reached for the buttons on his coat. Her fingers brushed the cloth, slow and sure, stopping at the second one. "You could go," she said. "I could. But if you don't." "I won't." She let her hand fall. "Then stay." Zethan closed the door behind him. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer waiting. It was choosing. And when she lay down that night, she didn't dream of the jailhouse or the sheriff or the river. She dreamed of a room with a door she could close and a man who kept his word. By late morning, Zadie stood at the side of the house, sleeves rolled past her elbows, feeding linens through a washboard. The sun was already high, heat rising off the stone walls in waves. Her hands, chapped from lye soap, moved steady through the work. Inside, she could hear the clatter of pans Zethan helping the woman of the house clear breakfast. He had offered without asking, and she'd noted how easily he moved in the quiet rhythm of another person's place, not trying to own it, just fit in where he could. He stepped outside not long after, wiping his hands on a dishcloth. "You always start the day with laundry. I prefer it to watching the dust settle," she said. "Work makes it feel like I belong to the day." He leaned against the low fence beside her, silent for a moment. "I talked to the trader again. He can get us a parcel of land west of here. Nothing big, just some brush and a small well, but the deed's clean." She set the cloth back in the pail and turned to face him. "You said us." "I did." "Is that what you want?" Her voice didn't waver, but her fingers fidgeted with her apron's hem. "I want to plant something that'll outlive a season," he said, "and I want to do it with you." She laughed, not sharply, but like someone surprised by her own hope. "You know anything about farming? I know how to keep a fence mended and a roof from leaking. The rest I can learn." She dipped the linens in the rinse bucket, then looked up at him again. "If we build it together, I'll stay." That afternoon, they walked to the edge of town where the trader's man waited with a rolled map and a tobacco pouch. The man's cart creaked with age, but he passed them the deed with a nod and a brief mutter about the land's boundaries measured in paces and marked by a crooked juniper near a dry wash. Zethan signed with a firm hand. Zadie did too. They moved a week later, leaving behind the stone house and the woman who asked no questions. Their new land lay to the west, where the ground was hard but not barren, and the wind carried the scent of kala and ironweed. The well was shallow but clean. A half-collapsed shed stood at the edge of it, leaning like a drunkard but still standing. Zethan spent his days hauling rock and patching the roof. Zadie cleared brush with a hoe and her bare hands, planting beans and marrow seeds in furrows she carved herself. They ate what they could trade for at first: dried maize, salt pork, flour wrapped in cotton sacks, but by the second month, their own greens sprouted in rows. One evening, she found him sitting near the edge of the porch they'd built together, watching the sky pinken with dusk. She stepped behind him and wound her arms around his shoulders. He rested his hands over hers. "You ever think you'd end up here?" "No," she said, "but I stopped needing to know what came next the moment I chose to stay." He turned, cupping her cheek. "I meant what I said. About building something that lasts." She leaned into his palm. "Then let's keep building." That night they lay beneath the stars, the room still without a roof but filled with warmth. Her head rested over his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. They said nothing, because nothing needed saying. Years passed. The land grew familiar, marked by the call of whip poor wills at dusk, by the way the light fell through the window Zethan had framed with his own hands. They harvested enough to trade, then enough to store. Zadie taught a few neighbor children to read from a Bible left behind in the shed. Zethan built a smokehouse. They added a second room when the first winter came with wind sharp enough to cut bone. One spring, she pressed his hand to the curve of her belly and watched his eyes change, gentled with awe, not fear. They named their son Elias after no one in particular, just a name that felt rooted. And when Elias took his first steps between the porch beams Zethan had carved, Zadie laughed so hard she dropped the bucket she'd been carrying. Their life wasn't grand, but it was steady, honest. Every stone in the hearth, every seedling in the garden bore the proof of two people who'd chosen one another not in desperation, but in the quiet steadiness of shared days. In time, no one remembered what had brought her south or what had made him stay. They were simply Zethan and Zethan Vale, the ones who lived, just past the dry wash, in the house with the juniper tree that leaned east in the wind. And every evening, as the cicadas sang and the desert cooled, they sat side by side on the porch they'd built together, hands clasped, hearts at ease, and no reason left to run.